A cool breeze swept through the quiet streets of St. Petersburg, Florida, as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that made people feel safe in their surroundings. But for one jogger, the illusion of safety was shattered in an instant. As he made his way through a remote stretch of parkland, something caught his eye near the tree line. At first it looked like a pile of discarded clothing, but as he moved closer, dread crept into his chest. A woman's body lay sprawled on the ground, her clothes soaked in blood. The sheer number of wounds was overwhelming, a brutal display of violence that sent a chill down his spine. Heart pounding, the jogger fumbled for his phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows over the gruesome scene. Officers moved in cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of movement. But it was clear. The killer was long gone. The woman's body bore more stab wounds than they could count at first glance, a level of brutality that spoke of uncontrolled rage. This wasn't just murder. It was overkill. As detectives examined the scene, a troubling detail emerged. A baby. Stroller sat abandoned just a few feet away. Its small wheels were smeared with dirt, as if it had been hastily dragged across the ground. Inside, there were no signs of a child, only a few scattered baby toys, and a sippy cup lying on its side. The unsettling realization hit everyone at once. If this woman was a mother, where was her child? A search team was immediately assembled. Officers fanned out, calling for any sign of a toddler. The thought of a young child wandering alone in the darkness sent urgency coursing through the team. The park stretched into a thick, swampy area near a lake, a place known for its dangerous wildlife. With every passing minute, the sense of dread deepened. Then, just after midnight, the discovery no one wanted to make. Near the edge of the dark waters, a deputy's flashlight reflected off something floating. As they moved closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. A small, lifeless body was partially submerged in the murky water. The toddler, no more than 2 years old, was eerily still, his tiny arms floating just beneath the surface. The water around him rippled unnaturally, and the sickening reality set in. Alligators had already found him. A rescue team rushed in, forcing the creatures back as they carefully retrieved the boy's body. Despite their efforts, it was too late. The child had drowned, his tiny frame battered by the water's movements. The gruesome nature of his death left even the most hardened officers shaken. As investigators pieced together the scene, one thing was undeniable. This was not a random tragedy. The mother had been brutally murdered, and her child had been thrown into the water, left to the mercy of the alligators. This was an act of pure evil, and whoever was responsible was still out there. The victim was soon identified as 24-year-old Melissa Carter, a single mother known for her unwavering love and dedication to her 2-year-old son, Jacob. Friends and family were devastated by the news, struggling to understand how something so horrific could have happened to a woman who had done nothing but care for her child. As investigators dug into Melissa's life, they began piecing together the events leading up to her brutal murder. The last confirmed sighting of Melissa and Jacob was at a gas station just hours before their deaths. Surveillance footage showed her stepping out of her car, filling up her tank while keeping a watchful eye on Jacob, who sat in the back seat. She appeared calm, completely unaware that someone might have been following her. At the time, nothing seemed unusual. But now, with the knowledge of what had happened, Detectives examined every detail of the footage, searching for anything that might offer a clue. A dark-colored sedan caught their attention. It was parked just a few pumps away, its driver barely visible. Though the footage was grainy, it was clear that the person inside was watching Melissa. As she drove away, the car pulled out seconds later, following in the same direction. Investigators now had a chilling theory. Melissa hadn't gone to that park by accident. She had been followed, possibly lured there by someone she knew. The crime scene itself held more disturbing details. There were no clear signs of a struggle near Melissa's body, which suggested that she had either been ambushed or forced to comply before the attack. The sheer number of stab wounds painted a picture of rage, a deeply personal attack fueled by something more than just a desire to kill. Someone had wanted her to suffer. But why? And who would be capable of such unimaginable violence? As investigators spoke to Melissa's close friends, a troubling history began to emerge. She had recently ended a toxic relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Damian Ross, a man known for his violent outbursts and controlling nature. Several of her friends revealed that she had been trying to distance herself from him for months. She had even filed for a restraining order, stating in the documents that she feared for her life. Damian had a history of domestic violence, but he always managed to avoid serious consequences. Now it seemed that her worst fears had come true. But there was another disturbing layer to the case. Witnesses recalled seeing not one, but two men near the park around the time of Melissa's murder. Could Damian have had help? His cousin, Eric, was also known for his violent tendencies, and the two had been inseparable in the past. Had they worked together to carry out this horrific crime? As detectives pieced together the clues, one thing became clear. Melissa hadn't just been the victim of a random act of violence. This was a carefully planned attack, one fueled by rage and a desire for control. But the most chilling detail of all remained unanswered. If Damian or someone else had wanted Melissa dead, why had they also killed Jacob in such a monstrous way? Investigators were determined to find out. As investigators dug deeper into Melissa Carter's life, the true extent of her troubled past began to surface. She had spent months trying to escape an abusive relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Damian Ross. He had a long history of controlling behavior, jealousy, and violence, yet Melissa had always hoped he would change. When it became clear that he wouldn't, she made the difficult decision to leave. But leaving Damian had not been easy. He had followed her, called her repeatedly, and even shown up at her workplace uninvited. The situation had escalated so much that Melissa had filed a restraining order against him just weeks before her murder, stating that she feared for her life. Her friends and family had warned her to stay away from him, but Damian had always found ways to manipulate her emotions. He would send long messages apologizing, swearing he had changed, only to become enraged when she ignored him. In the days leading up to her murder, he had sent multiple threatening texts, accusing her of trying to take Jacob away from him. It was clear that his anger had been building, but no one could have imagined just how far he would go. Investigators turned their attention to Damian, but they also discovered another disturbing connection. His cousin, Eric. Unlike Damian, Eric had a history of violent crimes, including assaults and armed robbery. He had spent time in jail and was known to be unpredictable and dangerous. Some of Melissa's friends had seen the two men together recently, which raised a terrifying possibility. Had Damian and Eric worked together to kill her? Detectives obtained security footage from various locations near the crime scene, and discovered a key piece of evidence. At a highway toll booth just miles from the park where Melissa was killed, Damien's car was captured on camera. The timestamp placed him in the area at the exact time of the murder. This directly contradicted his alibi, which he had given to the police earlier that day. He had claimed to be at home the entire evening, but the footage told a different story. When police confronted him with the evidence, Damien's demeanor changed. He denied any involvement at first, but his nervousness was evident. Investigators obtained a warrant to search his car and home, where they found further incriminating evidence: Melissa's blood on the back seat. The discovery left no doubt that she had been in his car the night of her murder. Meanwhile, detectives tracked down Eric and found that he had suddenly left town the day after Melissa's body was discovered. It was a suspicious move, one that suggested he had something to hide. Authorities put out an alert, and within days, he was located in another state and brought in for questioning. With both men now under investigation, the pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. But the most chilling part of the case was still to be revealed: the twisted motive behind the brutal murder of Melissa and the horrifying fate of her son, Jacob. With Damien Ross and his cousin Eric both in custody, investigators intensified their questioning. Damien remained defensive, repeatedly denying involvement, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. His car had traces of Melissa's blood. His alibi had been disproven, and his past threats made it clear that he had every reason to want her dead. But what still wasn't clear was why Jacob had to die in such a horrifying way. After hours of interrogation, Damien finally cracked. His confession was as chilling as it was shocking. He admitted to luring Melissa to the park under the pretense of discussing Jacob's future. He had told her that he wanted to work things out and be a better father, knowing she wouldn't refuse a chance to ensure a peaceful life for her son. But in reality, Damien had no intention of making amends. His only goal was revenge. He blamed Melissa for everything: for leaving him, for filing the restraining order, and most of all, for threatening to take Jacob away from him. In his twisted mind, if he couldn't have them both, no one could. Melissa never saw the attack coming. As soon as she arrived at the secluded spot, Damien struck with a knife, stabbing her repeatedly in a fit of uncontrollable rage. He described the act with chilling indifference, saying he lost count of how many times he stabbed her. Blood covered his hands, but he felt nothing. When she finally stopped moving, he stood over her body, his anger still burning. But it wasn't enough. Jacob, who had been in his stroller just feet away, started crying. The sound snapped Damien back to reality, and for the first time he hesitated, but then Eric stepped in. Unlike Damien, he had no emotional attachment to Jacob. To him, the child was just a loose end, one that needed to be eliminated. They placed Jacob in the car and drove to a nearby lake, surrounded by dark waters and alligators lurking beneath the surface. Damien claimed he had second thoughts, but Eric was the one who made the final move. He grabbed Jacob and threw him into the water, watching as the terrified toddler struggled before the rippling surface swallowed him whole. The sight made Damien sick, but it was too late to undo what had been done. They drove away in silence, leaving the child to a fate worse than death. Authorities were horrified by the confession. It was one thing to kill in anger, but to deliberately throw an innocent child into a place where he would suffer, it was beyond cruelty. Damien tried to shift blame, saying he never wanted Jacob to die, but his actions proved otherwise. He had set the events in motion, and now he would have to face the consequences. With the full story uncovered, the prosecution wasted no time in building a case. Damien and Eric were both charged with multiple counts, including first-degree murder. But no matter what punishment they received, nothing could erase the nightmare they had inflicted upon Melissa and Jacob. The trial of Damien Ross and Eric Parker became one of the most disturbing cases in Florida's recent history. The sheer brutality of the crime, the heartless way Jacob had been discarded, and the overwhelming evidence against them left the courtroom in shock. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline, showing how Damien had meticulously planned the attack on Melissa, and how Eric had played a crucial role in ensuring that neither mother nor son would survive. Melissa's family sat in the courtroom, every day, forced to relive the horror of her final moments. The pain of knowing Jacob's fate was unbearable. Prosecutors described how he had been thrown into the lake, left to drown, or be torn apart by the alligators. The jury listened in, stunned silence, some unable to hide their disgust. Even seasoned officers admitted that this case was among the most disturbing they had ever seen. Damien's defense attorney attempted to shift the blame onto Eric, claiming that Damien never intended for Jacob to die, and that Eric had acted on his own. But the evidence told a different story. Damien had driven to the lake. Damien had handed Jacob over. And Damien had made no attempt to stop what happened next. The jury saw through his lies. Eric, on the other hand, showed no remorse. His only regret seemed to be getting caught. He remained emotionless as the prosecution detailed his actions, as if the life of a 2-year-old boy meant nothing to him. His lack of humanity only reinforced the need for the harshest punishment possible. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Damien Ross was found guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and premeditated homicide. Eric Parker was convicted of murder and conspiracy. The judge wasted no time in sentencing them. Damien received life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Eric was given the death penalty. Neither man would ever walk free again. But for Melissa's family, justice did not bring closure. Nothing could erase the image of what had happened to her and Jacob. Nothing could undo the pain of losing them in such a horrific way. Her mother, through tears, spoke at the sentencing, saying that she would never forgive Damien or Eric. They had not only stolen her daughter, but had subjected her grandson to unimaginable suffering. The case served as a harsh reminder of the dangers of domestic violence and the depths of human cruelty. Melissa had tried to escape, but in the end, the man she once loved had destroyed her life. Organizations advocating for domestic abuse victims used her story as an example of why protective measures needed to be stronger, why victims needed better support, and why the warning signs of dangerous relationships should never be ignored. Though Damien and Eric were behind bars, the scars they left would never fully heal. Melissa and Jacob's names would be remembered not just as victims, but as a heartbreaking warning of how evil can exist where it's least expected.